Ho, ho, ho! I hope everyone is doing well today. Here we are at the Ministry of Stolen Resources in downtown Ottawa with a very simple message today. Santa says, shut muskrat down, stop the cultural genocide in Labrador. And what we're going to do is we've got a very special gift today for little Jimmy Carr. You all know Jimmy Carr. Jimmy is a nice young boy who's currently the person who is in charge of stolen resources in this land that is called Canada, much of which, of course, is unceded traditional territories. Hello, folks. How are you today? I'd like to give you each.
No, we can't accept.
You can't accept the candy cane? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm just dropping off a present that comes from Santa Claus, as well as from Rudolph and Mrs. Claus. And this is for the man upstairs, Jimmy Carr.
It has to go to the mailroom.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to explain what's in it first. And so what we're going to give to Jimmy Carr is a number of things. The first thing we're going to give to Jimmy Carr is something from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It says this, Article 7, Indigenous individuals have the rights to life, you got to put it straight, otherwise people can't see it, physical and mental integrity, liberty and security of persons. Indigenous peoples have the collective right to live in freedom, peace, and security as distinct peoples and shall not be subjected to any act of genocide or any other act of violence, including forcibly removing children of the group to another group. Now, why is this important today? Well, Santa is saying that at Muskrat Falls, the people who live downstream of Muskrat Falls, whether we're talking about Happy Valley Goose Bay or Rigolette or Mud Lake, are all facing a situation in which their right to life, physical and mental integrity, liberty, and security of the person is very gravely affected. Why is it affected? Because of this, the Muskrat Falls Mega Dam Hydro Project, which the Trudeau government and Jimmy Carr is backing with $9.2 billion worth of federal loan guarantees. The problem here is very simple. This dam threatens the people who live downstream. Many of them are Inuit and settlers in Labrador. And how does it threaten them? It threatens their right to life. Well, it threatens them because of the rise of methylmercury. Methylmercury will rise dramatically in the waters and affect the country food that has been relied on by Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. Santa does not like to hear that. It also affects their liberty. Scores of individuals who have stood up for their rights to be on their land, to conduct sacred ceremonies on their land, have been arrested and criminalized by the courts. Santa is not very happy about that. The security of the person. How can you live a normal life when you are afraid not only of methylmercury poisoning, but you're also afraid of a catastrophic dam break because a significant portion of Muskrat Falls is relying on something called the North Spur, which is built on something called quick clay. And some of the world's leading experts have said if that quick clay, you're trying to build a dam on that, it will give way under too much pressure and cause a catastrophic dam break. This is not a very safe thing. So we're going to give Article 7 of the UN Treaty on Indigenous Rights document to Jimmy Carr. We're also going to give him the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention is another very important document that little Jimmy needs to read up on because he seems to be ignoring some of the most dangerous parts of this Muskrat Falls project. Essentially, what he is doing is he is depriving individuals and peoples, whole peoples, the right to their cultural identity. And as we see, whether you are killing members of a group or you are causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of that group, do you know that the people downstream of Muskrat Falls, many of them go to sleep at night with life preservers under their bed because they are so afraid of being washed away in a flash flood? Santa does not like to hear these things when Santa gets his annual letters. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about their destruction in whole or in part. If you are a culture that has lived off of country food And basically, you have a project which is denying you the possibility of accessing that food, which is not only for your physical sustenance, it's also a key part of what roots you as a spiritual human being. That, too, is an act of genocide. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. A lot of people are wondering, if we continue to eat our traditional lifestyles, will we be passing on the deformities of methylmercury that we see in places like Grassy Narrows, Ontario, to our children downstream of Muskrat Falls, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group? We see that, of course, happening across this land called Canada. Today is 693 days since little Justin, I'm going to be visiting him as well, he has refused to end racial discrimination against 165,000 Indigenous children. Anyway, Jimmy's going to get a copy of this. We're also going to be giving him a copy of Article 10 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that Indigenous peoples shall not be removed from their lands or territories. No relocation without free, prior, and informed consent of the Indigenous peoples concerned, and after agreement on just and fair compensation. Now, I've been hearing and getting lots of letters from the folks downstream of Muskrat Falls, and they're saying, Santa, it's not right when there is no free, prior, and informed consent. Consent was not given. Hello, children. We're here trying to help all the little children of the world, and especially the children downstream of Muskrat Falls. So we wish you all a very happy holidays. So, okay, you have a happy holiday and a good solstice too, because today is the special solstice day. Now, that is Article 10 of UNDRIP. Oh, there's another article that we're going to give to Jimmy. Article 32. Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of their lands or territories and other resources. That's not happening at Muskrat Falls. At Muskrat Falls, we're seeing a mega corporation that's a crown corporation called Nalcor. They've come onto the Indigenous lands and they are running the show. That violates UNDRIP. And as we saw recently, Jimmy and Justin and Carolyn and Jane and all of the Liberals, you all said you were going to support Romeo Saganaus's Bill C-262 to implement these very articles from UNDRIP. Something is not right, and Santa is not pleased. States shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free and prior and informed consent. Now, we know that in a place like Kanesatake, for example, Carolyn Bennett and Jim Carr, among others, are refusing to deal with those individuals, their own representative institutions, such as the Longhouse. So we see across this land called Canada, whether it's Kinder Morgan or whether it's the Line 3, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, all of these mega projects, they are dangerous not only in and of themselves, they are dangerous because they trod on traditional Indigenous societies and their own decision-making bodies. So that's Article 32 for Jimmy. We also have Article 8. Indigenous peoples and individuals have the right not to be subjected to forced assimilation or destruction of their culture. And as I keep saying, hello there, we're talking today about what's going on at Muskrat Falls, and unfortunately, as you're probably well aware, the minister here of Stolen Resources, Jim Carr, he's imposing a project on Indigenous people and settlers in Labrador, which is going to destroy their culture in violation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And this is part of Jim Carr's present for the holidays. We're also going to give him Article 11. Indigenous peoples have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. But when your cultural traditions and customs are being violated by a project which is, through methylmercury poisoning, going to destroy that culture, you are again in violation of UNDRIP. We also see here that you have to protect archaeological and historical sites, artifacts, designs, ceremonies, technologies, but when you are flooding out traditional, sacred Indigenous lands, we see we have a major, major problem at Muskrat Falls. Now we're going to continue on. Oh, we have another article. Article 18. Indigenous peoples have the right to participate in decision-making in matters which would affect their rights. So again, Indigenous peoples are not being consulted. We hear constantly from this government that there is no relationship more important than that with Indigenous peoples. And yet, time after time, Santa is hearing from all kinds of folks across this land saying, where's the consultation? Where's the discussion? We are seeing imposition. We even see in the recent Supreme Court decision denying protection of charter rights to Indigenous peoples practicing their spirituality in a place called British Columbia. Article 29, another one. Indigenous peoples have the right to the conservation and protection of the environment. Protection of the environment. How can the environment be protected when you are injecting methylmercury into the environment? For the residents of Rigolet, for example, downstream of Muskrat Falls, methylmercury is expected to rise as much as 1,500%. How are you going to expect folks who rely on the fish, who rely on the seals, the walrus, all the life that they rely on as part of their traditional food web, how will that be protected and how will that not violate under Article 29? Article 29, number 2 says that states shall take effective measures to ensure that no storage or disposal of hazardous materials shall take place in the lands or territories of Indigenous peoples without their free, prior, and informed consent. And we know, of course, here in the land called Ontario, there is an attempt to dump massive amounts of nuclear waste on traditional Indigenous territories up near the Saugeen Shores. And in Labrador, we are seeing this again because Muskrat Falls will inevitably result in methylmercury poisoning. In fact, one of the things I'm going to present to Jimmy in his gift package is a report that was produced by Harvard University. And that Harvard University report was very clear. You can see it was actually published in something called the Environmental Science and Technology Journal. Future impacts of hydroelectric power development on methylmercury exposures of Canadian Indigenous communities. And what they found is not only is there a huge danger of methylmercury poisoning in Labrador with the Muskrat Falls project, but if we actually look down here, we see 22 hydro projects that are being planned by the federal government and provincial governments, and in over half of them, we are going to see massive increases, massive tenfold increase in methylmercury poisoning. So it's not just at Muskrat Falls, it's across this land. Santa is not very happy. Now, Santa will also be reminding Mr. Carr that he was given earlier this year the report of the Joint Review Panel, which was a joint provincial and federal panel. And what this did was raised hundreds of concerns about this project when it was first being considered. They're pretty much all being ignored. Most importantly, the thing that is being ignored the most are the voices of the Labrador land protectors. We also are going to be reminding him that Mr. Carr, Jimmy, as I used to call him, he has in his hands the SNC Lavalin risk assessment. Now, we all know that SNC Lavalin annually makes the Transparency International list as the most corrupt and oblique corporations on the planet, but when even they see problems with Muskrat Falls, you know something is amiss. Now, what I'm going to do now is show you as well a fantastic document which Santa has prepared for Jimmy, and that is Site C and Muskrat Falls compared. A lot of you are very worried, I know, about the recent approval by the NDP government in BC of the Site C dam, and Site C, like Muskrat Falls, will be a disaster. This is a fantastic report that looks not only at the fact that the costs of these mega boondoggle projects will be borne by the poor, it also looks at the fact that this is being done without the consent, free, prior, and informed of Indigenous people. Mr. Carr will also get another copy of this fantastic report from Harvard University, which actually did detailed studies on methylmercury poisoning that will be taking place and is now taking place at Muskrat Falls, Labrador as well. He really needs to read this and get a sense of how difficult it must be for individuals living downstream. Now, this is a report here, the safety and reliability of the Muskrat Falls Dam in light of the engineering report on December 15 by Nalcor SNC Lavalin. This is by a man named Dr. Stig Bernander. Stig Bernander, someone I've always enjoyed visiting whenever Christmas Eve rolls around overseas. Mr. Bernander is one of the world's leading experts on something called quitclay, and he has produced report after report that the federal government, the Newfoundland and Labrador government, and Nalcor are ignoring that this dam is dangerous. It cannot be built safely on this soil. Not only was this report produced in October of 2016, a new report was produced a year later in which Dr. Stig Bernander said, not only are my earlier findings correct, we are now facing even more significant problems because additional research has shown that it's even more dangerous than he first thought. So you can imagine what it must be like to live downstream of Muskrat Falls. So today, we're going to be presenting candy canes to some of the employees who work here. We're going to be presenting this gift to little Jimmy Carr, and we're going to be saying, Jimmy, hello, how are you? It's been a while since I've seen you. Can I give you a candy cane? Oh, thank you so much. I know not everyone, and this is not an example of proper lobbying. I know that's been in the news lately. You have no relationship to the Aga Khan. I do visit him, obviously, in my capacity as a professional. But as you know, our concerns continue with respect to Muskrat Falls. And I'm hoping you can take some of the new references to documentation up to Jimmy. I'm not sure if you're allowed to call him Jimmy, but since I've known him a lot longer than you have, you know, that's going to happen. So I'm going to present these documents are a reminder of all the documentation which has been presented this year to little Jimmy, and a reminder that the people downstream of Muskrat Falls are scared. They are living in fear for their lives. And that's why Santa has come to this conclusion that we have to shut Muskrat down. What's taking place there is a cultural genocide. And Carolyn Bennett was recently there. She refused to even consider the consequences of what was going on. And what the people of Muskrat Falls are now for is a suspension. They're so gentle for it to be shut down. They're saying suspend the operations until all the evidence has been heard. It's not good enough to have an inquiry while it's still going on. So what we're hoping is you can bring this to Mr. Carr as well as to all the individuals who have been meeting over Muskrat Falls this year. And the message is very simple. Each day that goes by, and we've been here many times before. I know my friends have been here. Yeah, well, indeed. It's really critical that we agree that everyone here, you know, you all have your jobs and whatnot, but at some point, somebody's got to blow the whistle on this thing and say, shut it now. It's too dangerous to proceed. And even if you're looking at an economic model, it's too costly to proceed. And who's going to pay for that? It's going to be some of the poorest people in one of the poorest provinces of this country. So I'm going to give you this to give to Jimmy, and I'm going to give you an extra candy cane. Oh, your hands are, oh my gosh, okay. That one's for Jimmy, and indeed, so I want to thank you again for receiving this. I don't know if you have an office.
I don't want the candy cane, I just want a card.
Feel free to put that there. And yes, hi, how are you? I'm going to give you a flyer.
I don't need the candy cane, just give me that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And I'll give you one as well. This is what's going on at Muskrat Falls. Hello! How are you doing? Well, you know, I'm here today. We're very concerned that, you know, a lot of people are very afraid this holiday season because what's going on at Muskrat Falls. Are you familiar with Muskrat Falls? It's a mega dam. Yes, and the federal government is supporting it with over $9 billion in loan guarantees. And Santa's been hearing from little children who are worried about methylmercury poisoning and catastrophic dam break. That's not the kind of thing we want to be supporting. No, exactly. So what we're hoping is you will continue to spread the word in this Ministry of Snow Resources that we should not be doing this to the people of Labrador, and we should not be doing this to the indigenous nations across this land who are facing similar catastrophic consequences, whether directly from pipelines or over the longer term from the effects of climate change.
Well, thank you, Santa.
Oh, well, I hope you have a very happy holiday season and enjoy the solstice as well. Yes, I'm not sure if I gave you one of these indeed. And I'm just going to leave this here. I know you guys are not officially take one, but go, sir. Thank you very much. Oh, how are you? You got it. Well, I'm not as jolly as I normally am because I'm very worried about what's going on in Muskrat Falls. Have you heard about what's going on in Falls? This is a large industry in North America. For $15 billion is being spent on a mega dam without the express, free, prior, and informed consent of the indigenous people who are most affected. And one of the biggest concerns is that this dam, when it floods the area, will increase the amount of methylmercury poisoning and country food that indigenous people rely on. So I work with Mrs. Claus and the Yells at the poll, but there is a group called the Labrador Land Protectors. So if you want, no, I'm from the North Pole, but nonetheless, I am someone who is working in support of all those good Labrador Land Protectors. Hello, sir. I'll give you one of these. Yes. And if you'd like to be in contact, I have this here goodwill and peace. All right. Okay. Oh, hello. We hope you have a very happy holiday season, and we hope you'll read this information about what's going on at the Muskrat Falls disaster in Labrador. It's a very dangerous. People are faced with methylmercury poisoning. They're also faced with catastrophic. Thank you very much.
We do a
And for those of you who may be tuning in on our normal cam, this is the Ministry of Soil and Resources, and you can see that there's all kinds of different sectors here, minerals and metals. And you know what? What I've learned is that these things are called resources, but what they really are gifts. They are the gifts that we enjoy as residents of this wonderful, wonderful planet. And we need to stop exploiting them, extracting them, because there's such a danger in that. So I want to basically say to everyone who's watching here today that Santa is pulling for you at Muskrat Falls. Santa supports you in your resistance efforts to sightsee. Santa supports the tiny houses movement that is trying to start Mountain King Morgan Pipeline. Santa is opposed to Line 3. Santa is opposed to all the mega mining projects destroying lands across the world. And Santa is hoping that all the Scrooges here not will change heart and listen to the voices of those who are most affected, those who are crying out for justice, that we can all learn to live together. This earth is a beautiful place, and I see it every year when I fly all around the globe. I'm really hoping that by the time next year, people downstream of Muskrat Falls will not have to worry about poisoning, will not have to worry about drowning. So I'd like to say once more that Mrs. Claus and I will be very busy over the next few days. She's going to fatten me up. But in the meantime, I'm going to say, think sweet thoughts. Think sweet thoughts about your fellow human being and about all of your fellow creatures, because we are all related to one another. So wishing you all a very happy holiday season, a fantastic solstice, and again, hopefully Jimmy Carr and Justin Trudeau, Carolyn Bennett, and James Philpott will really learn the lessons of UNDRIP and Bill C-262 and say respect Indigenous rights, honor those rights, and stop trampling on those rights. So best wishes to all. And remember, shut Muskrat down. This is Santa. I'm heading back to the North Pole because Rudolph needs to be fed, and we'll see you all.